Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my March wrap-up part 1. I didn't put up a video last week. I was actually planning on doing my March wrap-up last week, but life and work were just kicking my butt, so I decided to give myself a break, and it was a great decision because as soon as I had the thought of wait, I don't actually have to put up a video this week because this is all voluntary. A huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I very much appreciated having that time off. Anyways, yes, I am doing my March wrap-up part 1, so I will be talking about the books that I read in the first half of the month. The first book I have is The Plotters by Eun-Soo Kim. This is a relatively new release that was translated from Korean. So in this story, you are following this character named Ri-sing. He was abandoned as a baby and he was picked up by this man named Old Raccoon, and Old Raccoon basically runs this crime assassin organization. In this organization there are the assassins, and then there are the plotters, who are the people who put together the plan of how the assassination will go down. Ri-sing grows up in this organization. He ends up becoming an assassin himself. The way this story starts off is that Ri-sing is sent on a job and he wavers from the plan, and so from that point forward you are following Ri-sing as he starts questioning things about the organization and just sort of looking into things a little bit, but also just having general life existential crises type of feelings. He starts realizing and recognizing certain things, and he starts just making changes about the way things are happening in his life. It's a really vague synopsis because that's sort of the best way to go into this book. I give this book a 3 out of 5 stars. I think either a 3 or a 3.5, but it's right in that range. This is a really interesting book to me, but it wasn't a great reading experience. I saw comparisons to this book to Quentin Tarantino and Wes Anderson, and I think those are kind of apt. There's a large cast of characters in here, and they're all really, I feel wacky or weird. I feel wacky is a better term than weird. They have a very Wes Anderson, really out there sort of feeling to them. And then the Tarantino comparison I think comes from the action scenes in here. They're all super violent and very, again, sort of over the top and almost cartoonish in that very Tarantino way. But those are not necessarily things that draw me to a book. I don't mind wacky characters and stuff like that, but I think a lot of that deterred from the actual main plot itself. It takes a significant amount of time before it feels like things really get going. You spend a lot of time flashing back and learning the histories of a lot of these characters who are just side characters, and it feels like that's sort of wasted time almost, or wasted pages, because a lot of times I was reading all of that and I wanted to either get back to the main storyline, or I didn't really care about the character at all, or I was getting invested thinking that this was going to mean something later and it doesn't really. So I feel that really deterred from it. But there came a point, I think it was maybe at the 50 or 60% mark of this book, where the plot really takes hold and really becomes the point. It feels like you're finally getting started. And once you get into that, it moves ahead, and I had a lot of fun, and I feel that wasn't enough of the book itself. So I feel if you're someone who wants something kind of fun and out there, if you really action-packed thrillers, this is kind of a fun one to pick up, but it's not something I can give a full wholehearted recommendation to, because I think the beginning is a little bit tough to get into. For me, I was enjoying the writing enough to keep going with it, and I found it compelling enough to keep going with it because I wanted to know what was going to happen, but I think it just gets too sidetracked too many times to be a really, really enjoyable experience for me. So yeah, like I said, I give it a 3 out of 5 stars. Not terrible, but not the best. The next book that I have to talk about is The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. This is a book that since I found out it was coming out, I've been really excited for. I read The Age of Miracles when that first came out. I think I even have a review of it on the channel, which I may or may not link to because it's really old and it might be terrible. So what Karen Thompson Walker did in The Age of Miracles is she took sort of a dystopian world and looked at a very specific character and family, and in this one she creates a slightly dystopian world, but she looks at it from a broader point of view. So it takes place in a Southern California college town. You are basically watching as this disease spreads, where people fall asleep and don't wake up again. They basically go into a kind of comatose state, but there's enough brain activity that people know that they're dreaming and not, vegetables or anything like that. And you see how it impacts different people in the town. So you are following this college girl named May, who is super quiet and doesn't have a lot of friends, but her roommate is one of the first people to fall into this state. Follow this married couple with a newborn baby who have just moved to Southern California to teach at the school. You follow this other teacher who is significantly older. You also follow this like survivalist type of family whose father is basically like a doomsday prepper type of person, and he has like two young girls. And so you start to see like sort of how this disease spreads, how it impacts all of these different people, and sort of the choices that everyone makes. This is a book I think I gave a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. It's another one that's more like a 3.5 stars. Like I said, it takes a very broad view of this world, and it's much more about the choices that people make when they are put in these sort of situations of like really impossible choices that you need to make, and less about like the individual people and the characters. It does have the problem for me of like too many perspectives. There were certain storylines I cared about significantly more than others. If you are the type of person who wants like explanations for the dystopia or like why things are happening, this book will be very unsatisfactory because there's like no explanation for the disease or how everything sort of wraps up. It just sort of occurs and you just sort of have to accept it, because also that's not really the point of the book either. But just like know that going into it, if you see this described as like a dystopia or anything like that, and you are someone who likes the explanations behind why dystopias take place, this is not that for you. But I think this book suffers compared to The Age of Miracles just because, again, with The Age of Miracles, you're just following like one character in one family, and so you get really attached to them as people, and in this one you don't get that attachment, and so I feel like it loses some of that heart and connection that you can make with a book. But this book has a very like airy, dream-like feeling to it, which I think is very impressive as well. So yeah, I gave it, again, a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think that if it's a book that sounds interesting to you, I would recommend it. Or if you enjoyed The Age of Miracles and you've been wondering about this one, I think it's worth picking up. And also, as like a side note, I read the whole thing in like a single day. It's a really fast read and a really like addicting read. So it's also good if you are in the mood for something like that. Okay, and the final book I have to talk about in this video is The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls by Anissa Gray. This is another relatively new release. I think it also came out in February. This is a book I have really complicated feelings about. I think I also gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like this happens to me at the beginnings of every month. Like all of my reads are just 3.5 star reads. Anyways, so this book is getting pitched as like The Mothers Meets an American Marriage, which I think is apt, but also it's not quite as good as those books in my opinion. So you are following the Butler family, and specifically the 3 girls in the Butler family, Althea, Viola, and Lillian, and they also have a brother, but you don't get any of the chapters from his perspective. Althea is married to this man named Proctor, and at the beginning of the story they've been arrested. They had a restaurant and they took a bunch of people's money saying that they were raising money for some charity or for the town or something like that, and they ended up just taking the money for themselves and doing a whole bunch of other like food stamp schemes and stuff like that, and so they end up going to jail. So Lillian ends up taking in their 2 high school age girls, and Viola comes back home from, I think it's Michigan or something like that, or maybe they live in Michigan, I can't remember, but anyway, she had like moved out of town and she comes back for this whole situation, and you are just following them as they like deal with their new life. Althea and Proctor were like really beloved and well respected in their town, but obviously now they're not, and a lot of people hate them and they're taking it out on the rest of the family. But you're also following each of the sisters as they deal with their own sort of demons and history and background and all of their sort of baggage. A couple of things about this book. One of the characters in this book has an eating disorder, and I feel like the way they talk about her eating disorder is like one of the most realistic but also a little bit graphic ways that I've ever read an eating disorder described. So it's like fantastic for someone like me who has never experienced that sort of disordered eating before, giving me insight into that mindset and what that experience is like. But I think that if you are someone who has maybe struggled with disordered eating and considers things like that a trigger, I feel like this book is going to be extremely triggering in that effect, so be forewarned for that. Also, if you are looking for books that feature like people of color as well as LGBTQ characters, that's all in here. The entire Butler family is a Black family. And one of the sisters is, I don't know if they ever say explicitly like how she identifies, but she is with another woman. So yeah, like I said, I had very complicated feelings about this book because this book does a really good job of talking about topics that are often not talked about, especially I feel like in certain communities and circles, you know, talking about people who have eating disorders, people who are in complicated relationships, talking about complicated mother-daughter relationships, the way that they talk about Althea's relationship with one of her daughters who is overweight is really, really complicated, but I also feel like really well done. There's also topics about abuse, physical abuse, but I feel like some of the topics are so deep and worth spending time on, but because you're following all of these different perspectives, you don't really go deep enough. And also you're in the heads of all of these characters, and all of these characters kind of don't want to confront these demons, and so you don't get the good discussions that I think I was at least hoping would come out of this book. Like, you see one of the characters talk a little bit about the fact that she was abused, but like barely, and she more like hints at it and things like that, and there isn't really like a resolution to that. You see sort of Althea's complicated relationship with her daughter, but you don't really see it evolve or resolve or anything like that. You know that Althea and Proctor have done all of this financial stuff, but there's no explanation as to like why they really did any of this. You're just supposed to take it as it happened. This book also does the thing that kind of annoys me, where like characters hint at things happening, but the way that they hint at it, it's like not natural. It's not like the way people naturally talk to each other, but it's meant to be a way to like create mystery about like what actually happened. That like writing style always really bothers me. It always feels very like amateurish. So yeah, like I said, I have really complicated feelings about this book. I feel like if you are intrigued by it, it's worth picking up from like the library or something like that, because I like that it's tackling topics like this, but I wish it had gone deeper into all of these topics, because they are all complicated and deep, and I feel like deserve more time and pages to really dig into it a little bit more. But I know a lot of people who really, really love this book, so it could just be my own personal preference. I mean, it's always my own personal preference, but you know, your mileage may vary. So yeah, that is everything I have for this video. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of these books, or if you have any questions about any of the books I talked about here. March got off to a very slow reading start. I'm hoping that things are picking up a little bit more in the second half of the month, but it looks like I'm on track to read like 6 or 7 books total this month, which is fine, but not great. And I was hoping to do more, but whatever. But you'll hear about the rest of the books that I've read so far this month next week. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.